Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Rosenberg. I'm from Media Alliance, and I'll be your moderator for this panel about how to stop the hate and lies on Facebook. We have a great panel for you, and you'll be hearing from Jeff Chester of the Center for Digital Democracy, Carmen Scurato from Free Press and the Change the Terms Coalition, Fadi from Avaaz, and Andrea Buffa from the Protest Facebook Coalition. Online hate speech and incitements to violence, as well as disinformation about public health and voting, have been all over the world's biggest social media platform, endangering vulnerable people, fracturing movements, and preventing any kind of real dialogue. Pressure is increasing on Facebook. There's widespread horror over posts encouraging violence against police brutality, protesters, and not just from our orange-haired leader. Advertisers are starting to leave, employees are rising up. In response to this, Facebook has made some gestures like a somewhat toothless oversight board, meetings with civil rights groups that left those groups saying, Zuckerberg, he doesn't get it, and promises to reconsider and rethink what they're doing. But what they're doing is basically nothing. There is nothing remotely responsive to the scale of the problem. In frustration, a hashtag delete Facebook movement has sprung up. But given Facebook's penetration into our lives as they track us about the web and ubiquitous tagging by friends and acquaintances every time we go to a barbecue or a baby is born, we can only partially remove it from our lives. And even if we do, the impact of billions of users having their personal preferences weaponized for profit is still felt. It's felt in our movements, it's felt in our families, and it's felt at the ballot box, and it's felt on the street. This is a collective problem, and individual solutions only take us so far. Especially those of us who have been involved with the alternative media movement for years have fears about tech companies determining what's true and what's not true, and cutting off information sources that are alternative or not mainstream. Some of Facebook's past kind of lame fact-checking efforts have choked off traffic for independent news sites and created problems. So in facing this blizzard of disinformation, the slippery slope of censorship is kind of always present. But that doesn't mean that we can fail to act. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Jeff Chester, who's been studying advertising and social media for years. Jeff, can you explain to us some of the techniques that Facebook, among other platforms, uses to promote the virality of bad information, fake information, false information, manipulate who sees what, and promote deceptive advertisements?
First, I want to thank Media Alliance and Global Exchange and all your allies for this incredibly important frontline work that you're doing. As you said, it's going to take multiple efforts, multiple global efforts, to try to reconstruct what our digital media system should look like if it's going to serve the public and serve democracy. I've actually been, so this is the good news and the bad news, shows you how lack of success. I've been fighting Facebook since 2007. And when they released their first ad product, which was called Beacon for any of you history majors, and there was a pushback on privacy, they created their basic way they handle political pressure. They go to the limit, there's pushback, they say they're sorry, they'll study it, and they continue to do basically what they want to do. And that's one thing that is true about Facebook and also about Google, is that every day Facebook is working to expand the power it has over our lives. It is truly a unique and frightening phenomenon. And part of that problem is the business model that first Google and then Facebook really pioneered, and which is now everywhere, in every other country, even competitors replicate the Facebook model. So let me just tell you what Facebook, of course, has been opposed to any privacy regulation, which is why we have no privacy regulation in the United States. Facebook has been opposed to any advertising regulation, federal privacy legislation. Facebook has been fighting, obviously, against being reviewed by regulators, by competition regulators. Look, there's no limit on what Facebook can do in terms of collecting information. And see, what the so-called mad genius of the Trump campaign in 2016, as you know, is they hired a regular marketing person, Brad Pascal, to run the campaign. And Brad said, unlike the insiders from the political campaign world, hey, you can do anything on Facebook. Because there are no limits, there are no rules in what you can do with data and how that data can be leveraged to influence the individual and collective behaviors of the public. And that's what Pascal did, and that's what they're doing every day now on Facebook. And if you go to the Facebook ad library, which I'm sure you're all have been doing, and you look at the Trump campaign, you will see the kind of unique testing it is doing to really hone in and send these manipulative and very harmful messages to very targeted groups and to kind of hone all that. So look, there's just very quickly, in terms of answering your questions, there's no limits in how Facebook can collect and use cross-device data. They have your mobile phone data, they have your gaming data, they have your app data, they have your platform data. They have all your geolocation. They can use that data in any way, which they do to create that targeting profile. And they analyze that. There's no limits in what kind of an analysis they can do. What are your fears? What are your worries? What are your concerns? What are your interests? All that information is continually collected and analyzed to deliver what they call actionable insights. There's no limits on all the techniques they can use to create advertising and marketing that really influences the unconscious, subconscious mind, which is why Facebook's been doing neuromarketing and biometrics and other kinds of digital advertising services that are designed to get our emotions to work versus our consciousness. There's no limits on how they can test those ads, is what the Trump campaign represents, to make sure that they are truly honed and individualized and work effectively on every platform and every application. And critically, and political campaigns are using this now, there's no limits on how they can apply cutting edge technology to all of these things already in place. Facebook is a pioneer in creating algorithms that use artificial intelligence and machine learning to determine in advance what is the most effective message to persuade change an individual's behavior. And for our colleagues looking at Facebook IQ, which is the part of Facebook that's set up for advertising research, look at the case studies on Facebook IQ, look at Facebook's marketing science division, which is really the heart of what their vision is for the company, and look at Facebook for Business. Look at the case studies, Facebook for Business. They've now pulled off the case studies on their political campaigns. But you can see the kinds of power they have, and what they can deliver to political campaigns, junk food advertisers and pharmaceutical companies, et cetera. And then finally, I was on the Trump campaign website yesterday, and if you look at the privacy policy of the Trump campaign website, everything is collected and used. But it says, for those in California, you have certain privacy rights. And you can find out what third parties we're sharing information with. So I think there's an opportunity here for you guys to come in and create an effort that really forces the Trump campaign to identify what third parties are being shared that data, and including what Facebook's doing with it. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And it sounds like you've given us some homework here, which is wonderful. So we're going to turn to Carmen Scurato with the Change the Terms Coalition and Free Press. Hi, Carmen. So in many cases, these platforms, and Facebook in particular, has told us that they are simply helpless in the face of viral disinformation, hate speech, incitement to violence, that there's nothing they can do, basically. Change the Terms very specifically rejects that and says there's a whole bunch that you guys can do. Tell us what you think that Facebook can do right now and is choosing not to.
Thank you, Tracy, for that question. And again, thank you for having me on this, really important conversation. You're absolutely right. The companies are not helpless. And in fact, they have all the power and the resources they need to do better. And with Facebook, I can't help but just think about what Jeff said about how it's the business model, how there's no limits on what they can do. And that also brings to mind, there's a book by Siva Vayanathan called Anti-Social Media. And in it, he just says the problem with Facebook is Facebook, and that all the problems that Facebook amplifies and intensifies are because Facebook is working exactly the way it's supposed to. So it works on engagement, so it amplifies hate, and it becomes this catalyst for disinformation, which is exactly what's happening now. So Facebook is sitting here and they're profiting off of hate, and they're profiting exactly what you said, off of the weaponization of its platform against people of color. So this is not just a problem from the last few weeks. This is a problem that has been going on for the last few years. And so what we've been doing at Free Press and through our work in the Change the Terms Coalition is asking Facebook to enforce its own policies. And so Free Press is one of the co-founders of the Change the Terms Coalition, and we're made up of over 50 racial and social justice organizations. We launched this effort over a year and a half ago in October of 2018 with a set of model terms of service and corporate policies that these online platforms like Facebook can use that are designed to curb hate online. And there are several recommendations that you can find. They're all on the changetheterms.org website. Some examples include just equitable enforcement of their policies, greater transparency, and we also ask them for better training and better resources for content moderators. So this coalition, it was really brought together because what we saw and what we continue to see is that white supremacists are manipulating these platforms. They're using these platforms to amplify hate. They're using them to organize, to fundraise. And this normalizes the racism, sexism, bigotry, and xenophobia that they spew out. And this needs to stop. So as long, these are longstanding problems. And, what's been happening these last few weeks can clearly shows you that Facebook's leadership is just on the wrong side of history. Tracy, I think you just said it at the beginning, like Zuck just doesn't get it, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen Facebook employees stage virtual walkouts. And just a couple of days ago, some Facebook content moderators posted this open letter on Medium to Mark Zuckerberg, just urging him to reconsider his content moderation decision. Right, we understand these policies. But in fact, Zuckerberg, he doubled down in a recent blog post, and he just said, we're going to uphold the right of free expression, just clearly not understanding this country's history and how free speech has never really been free for people of color. So really, I do want to answer your question, which is what can Facebook do right now? And I really think that on a very basic level, they should just apply their community standards to the president and to other politicians. They should take down content that glorifies violence, and they should take down content that leads to voter suppression. They really need to truly commit to removing dangerous hate and disinformation from their platform. And it's because these things are really putting the lives of people in our country in very serious and real danger.
Okay, thank you so much, Carmen. We're going to move on to Fadi, who is the campaigns director at Avaaz. Fadi, Avaaz has made efforts to, as you call it, correct the record, which is I guess has been a process of sort of monitoring disinformation and basically going through a labeling process. Have you seen positive results from doing that? And is it possible to do it at scale, given that we have, 2.3 billion users on Facebook and growing internationally? Do you think that sort of correcting the record is a model that can really tackle viral disinformation? And if so, why and how?
That's a great question. Hey, thank you for having me on the call. And that's a very important question. And I want to say a little bit about how we got to that solution. So Avaaz is an online kind of global civic movement with 62 million subscribers. And I don't want to be campaigning against Facebook, largely because there are more important issues, climate change, human rights, gender equality. There's so many issues that are important to the world today. And yet the way we function is democratic. So we ask our members, what are the key issues you want us to campaign around? And what we have been seeing is that consistently for all the battles we care about, whether we're fighting against climate change, whether we're fighting for gender equality, disinformation and the toxicity of Facebook and other social media platforms is making the struggle for all of these other issues, anti-racism and so forth, much more difficult. So it has become a necessity to fix Facebook, to solve this problem. And what we began doing in terms of thinking about this is speaking to experts. How can we as people influence this social media behemoth? And what solutions are effective and possible? And that's where we came, Correct the Record as part of a kind of three-pronged solution largely. Number one, the idea of Correct the Record is simple. And we have the same type of regulatory protections for the financial sector, where if someone, let's say, puts out something that is false about a specific product or about specific shares, there needs to be a correction. In the press, it's the same thing. Most journalism, most journalists, most newspapers, if there's a mistake, they put a correction out. Technically, we know that it is possible for Facebook, once they detect disinformation, let's talk about the Russian disinformation campaign 2016 that they detected, they could tell every single person who was targeted by that campaign, who was exposed to that content, they can give them a notification saying, sorry, you saw this post, we found that this was led by XYZ, here's a correction from PolitiFact or Snopes. And doing that, and independent studies run at, from MIT and a study run by professors at George Washington University and others, it shows that simply showing users these corrections, these fact checks, can decrease the amount of people that believe misinformation by up to 50%, maybe more. And where I want to go with this is also to say that our recent research by Avaaz shows that when it comes to COVID-19, when it comes to this pandemic, the research is still ongoing, but what we're seeing is that 83% of Americans have seen at least one piece of misinformation about the pandemic and harmful misinformation. And where have they seen the majority of this? On Facebook. And so consequently, and then we ask, well, Facebook has done this huge PR push about its policies to fight the pandemic and so forth. But what we find is very few people have seen corrections to this harmful misinformation. But correcting the record is an important and urgent first step that Facebook can do today, that we know from working and speaking with Facebook that it is possible, it is scalable. It's not about correcting the record, is not about correcting what your crazy uncle posts on Facebook that has 3 likes. It's about a lot of viral misinformation content that reaches thousands of people that is flagged by fact checkers and fact checked. They could respond to that. But again, that's one part. The other thing they need to do is connected to what other speakers have said, which is detoxing their algorithm. The algorithm today is designed essentially to pull people's data, to monetize people's data, to keep people online. That's why it's stoking outrage. It learns to do that essentially. And it can be redesigned to be more humane. It can be redesigned to provide more healthy content instead of abusive content. And the platform can also fix that if they choose to do so. The platform won't do neither, and I think we can go into more detail in this conversation. It won't do neither without pressure and likely without the regulation, and that's where our role comes in.
Absolutely. Okay, so I see some questions piling up in the chat, and we will be getting to them shortly, but we have one more panelist. Andrea Buffa is with the Protest Facebook Coalition, which is a local coalition, a partnership between Global Exchange and Media Alliance, which has been trying to sort of challenge Facebook right here at home in the Bay Area. So Andrea, what does the Protest Facebook Coalition propose doing in Facebook's backyard to create pressure for change? We're right here, they're right here, we are their users, we are their product. What can we really do to sort of change the sort of, what seems to be kind of a current stalemate right now? We know what the problem is and they're not responding. How do we change that?
Well, first I want to say that this seems like forever ago, but last October, Mark Zuckerberg made an announcement that advertisements by political campaigns and politicians were going to be exempt from Facebook's community standards and from their fact checking, which meant there would be freedom to lie and spread hate and misinformation on Facebook by advertisements by politicians and political campaigns. So it seems like forever ago that people were totally outraged about that, because there are so many things to be outraged about since then. But that sparked a bunch of fed up Facebook users, I'm one of them, to join together with human rights organizations and pro-democracy organizations and corporate campaigners based in the San Francisco Bay Area, because we said, Facebook is in our backyard. The headquarters is in Menlo Park. And lots of us have experience with corporate campaigns, and we thought, you know, a determined group of organizations and people can put a lot of pressure on a campaign. We realized that, you know, in the end, probably Facebook should be broken up. So there's a lot of different things that should happen, and that other folks have addressed in terms of the structural problems with Facebook, but also the fact that it has so much power over our democracies, over our human rights, and over the information that people receive. But we also know that we have an election coming up in November 2020. And so our coalition decided to focus in the short term on the political ads policy. As we started talking to other folks in the Bay Area about this, we found out there were lots of other groups that were talking about the same thing. So we connected with one of the Indivisible chapters that is near the Facebook corporate headquarters, and with lots of other organizations. And so we started a corporate campaign, which kicked off in January. And we've been doing, you know, primarily what we wanted to do was to put pressure on the Facebook leadership that's based in the San Francisco Bay Area. So that means Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, there are Facebook investors here, there are Facebook board members here. And so we have held protests outside of the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park, outside of Mark Zuckerberg's house in San Francisco, at Sheryl Sandberg's house in Palo Alto. And most recently, we did a projection on the side of the Facebook office in San Francisco the night before the Facebook shareholders meeting, because they actually had a shareholders resolution related to Facebook's reckless political ads policy. We kind of use creative tactics and humor. The official name of our coalition is Don't Let Facebook Zuck Up Our Democracy. Zuck up. And, you know, that kind of is in line with our tactics, which of course have had to be modified because of the COVID-19 pandemic, because street heat looks different these days. But our focus has been on, you know, putting pressure on those in the Bay Area, using creativity to get ourselves into the news, which we've managed to do even with a small number of people, and joining with these other efforts, because from a corporate campaigning perspective, it's not just going to be folks in the San Francisco Bay Area protesting outside of the headquarters and people's houses that's going to get the change. We need to use all of these different tactics together. So we have supported national organizations like MoveOn.org and People for the American Way that have been doing work on Facebook issues. We've joined with Free Press and with Some of Us on some of our protests. And we are also finding out about and trying to promote other efforts that are happening. So just recently, a new Twitter account popped up. It's called Detox Facebook. So it's Detox_Facebook. And they are pushing major corporations to stop advertising on Facebook, especially around the fact that Facebook is allowing Donald Trump to encourage violence towards people who are protesting against racism and police brutality. So that's another important aspect of corporate campaigns, is to hit them in the pocketbook. And that means pressuring advertisers, which in the case of Facebook is basically any major corporation that you can think of in the world. So I really recommend that people check out that campaign, and that's a campaign that we're going to be supporting as well. So just a few more comments is that I also just found out about a protest that's happening in Silicon Valley on Friday. And it's protesting Facebook and other Silicon Valley corporations that profit from the criminal justice system. So, you know, part of what we're doing in our Protest Facebook Coalition is trying to support the other things that are going on and bring us all together so that we're strong enough, you know, to pressure Facebook to change, to get legislation someday, you know, to support litigation and all of the other tactics that are going to have to be combined in order to achieve real change. And so our demands, which are our limited demands of our campaign, are focused on political advertisements, and they are pressuring Facebook to refuse political ads that lie, which means hold the political ads to the same standards they hold other Facebook content, to refuse to sell political ad micro-targeting. And I think somebody else on this webinar should talk about micro-targeting, but it basically allows corporations, politicians to target very small segments and specific segments of the population, and other folks are not able to see or don't become aware of misinformation and disinformation and hatred that has been focused just on those individuals. So refuse political ad micro-targeting, and an idea that we got from Change the Terms, to deny service to anyone who is seeking to disrupt the 2020 election on Facebook. So the Change the Terms is broader about basically denying service to people that are trying to, you know, foment violence and hatred. And well, Carmen can speak to the specifics of that. But, you know, just like any company can refuse service to somebody that violates their policies, Facebook can refuse service to people that are trying to disrupt the 2020 election.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have actually lots of questions piling up on the chat. We're gonna try to get through them all, maybe yes, maybe no. We have 30 minutes, but keep in mind that it looks like we have at least 8 or 9 questions piled up, so hopefully we can address them both fully and concisely at the same time. First of all, there were lots of questions about whether this webinar is being recorded and if it can be watched afterwards or forwarded. So let me just say that this website is being live streamed on the Facebook pages of Global Exchange and of Media Alliance. You can watch it in either location. We hope to have it up on YouTube as well. And we'll post those coordinates on the Facebook event page down the line. And the stream should be up, as I said, on both Facebook web pages and can be forwarded or shared or downloaded and sent. We sort of like the meta appeal of doing organizing against Facebook on Facebook. So in terms of questions from the chat, let's see what we've got here. Okay. So the first question, this might be something that Carmen or Fadi wants to take on, from Kalinda Ray. I heard that content moderators on Facebook have to view and decide on 5,000 or so messages or images per day. How can this be done reasonably by anyone? So this is a question sort of about scale and fact checking.
So I can jump with a quick answer, which is, number one, Facebook needs to expand the amount of people that it hires and improve the conditions for the moderators. Now, there are systems, and I think for the sake of time, it's better for me not to go into too much detail, but essentially, the system can be designed in a way where, number one, moderators don't need to view all the content on Facebook. There are different ways to flag specific content. And then if you hire more people, and Facebook has the resources to do that, you can create good living conditions. And one problem with how Facebook engages on this is that the content moderators are not diverse and fair enough. There are some countries and some even languages, like the Assamese language in part of India, where there's a potential humanitarian crisis unfolding, and it's being, just like what happened with the Rohingya, it's being pushed online through social media and particularly on Facebook. There's very little capacity and moderators for that language. So if Facebook were to prioritize this, what they would do is they would hire more people, they would optimize their systems, and they would ensure that this works effectively. But consistently what we've seen is that although Facebook says this is a priority, the actual processes that they have built have not only been ineffective, they have been harming moderators, as the person answering the question asks. And that's why these moderators should also be given certain benefits, like access. One thing we do at Avaaz for our researchers is everyone can have access, can ask for psychological support, because if you're looking at this content consistently, it is painful, it hurts you, it can hurt your kind of whole psychology in many different ways. And Facebook needs to invest more in that type of direction to ensure that it cares for these moderators. And that's possible. They have the resources to do that. They just need to also put the political will to do it at scale.
Thank you. Yes, they definitely have the resources. Next question. This is our slippery slope question from Sydney Jacobs. While I agree that Facebook and other social media should be policing the content on their websites, who will make the decisions about what is and is not acceptable? It's a similar conundrum that existed around what is pornography. In other words, the answer being, you know it when you see it. So please discuss sort of who the hate speech and disinformation police should be, and how we identify, again, what is and is not acceptable. Who wants to take that?
I'll take it.
Okay,
yeah, so, it's a great question. I will say that Facebook has a very, very extensive hate speech policy. So it has a good policy. Now, a policy is very different than the way it is enforcing that policy, and whether it enforces that policy equitably across all of its users. So I think that is, that's been one of the focus of the Change the Terms Coalition. One of our recommendations is that we need to really take a look at how things are being enforced. And that's where we're asking for transparency reports, because we need to understand how Facebook is doing this, how they're actually applying their policies. And then we can see, well, are they making the right decisions? Are they, are people being impacted in a different way because of the color of their skin? Because, and it's really interesting because we have seen, Black activists getting their content taken down, where white supremacists get their content left up. So why is that? And I think we need to dig deeper into, again, saying I completely agree with the content moderators and that Facebook needs to do better. And one of the recommendations we actually have is to get culturally relevant training materials, and to make those training materials available for review so that we can see, so that they can get feedback from experts on how to make this better. And so I think, when we talk about, especially Facebook, we really need to talk about how they're enforcing their policies.
yes.
I think we also have to, part of that would also be regulating the advertising system, and how the advertising system is really structured to take advantage of people's emotions, and all the information that both Facebook has and Facebook's willing to give with its key advertisers, such as the Trump campaign, to take advantage of all of that. So the advertising system has a role to play here too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so next question, and this is something that I know is timely right now. This is from Hillary Abramson. Can Facebook users pressure shareholders to get Zuckerberg to correct Trump lies, as Twitter did, or to do any of the things that we're talking about? And since there's an effort that's been underway to do that, maybe someone can tell us about it. Maybe Andrea, maybe Carmen, maybe Fadi. But anyway, is there a way to pressure shareholders to get Zuckerberg to straighten up and fly straight? Has it worked, or can it work?
I can start. It hasn't worked yet. In fact, at the shareholders meeting, which was just a few weeks ago, all of the shareholder resolutions related to lies in political advertising, related to human rights, where the company recommended against them and the shareholders voted them down. So I think, you know, for all of us that really want to do something, we need to talk about kind of what's most effective, right? So the shareholders are a very large group of people. So I think if folks want to target shareholders, you need to figure out which shareholders. Unfortunately, Facebook's structure is set up in a way right now that it's really hard for anybody at Facebook to hold Mark Zuckerberg accountable. He's replaced most of the board members with people who are close allies. Some board members have left recently because of their being upset about Facebook not addressing these issues, not taking them seriously enough. And so I think, you know, the board members is a smaller group of people. So yeah, so I guess it's the question of, you know, pressuring shareholders versus another tactic.
Okay, so next question is basically comparing two things. One is sort of, do we want to do content moderation type of work to sort of reduce the Facebook toxicity? Or is it really more important to attack the entire business model of Facebook and basically try to financially undermine it, I guess by way of like an advertiser's boycott? So do people think that we can basically fix Facebook and just make it nicer? Or do we really have to take the thing apart?
I mean, there is a move now, which you are all part of, and we too, I mean, to potentially break up Google and Facebook. I mean, we've never been at this point. I mean, both the Democrats and the Republicans allowed Facebook and Google to grow unfettered, in essence, giving them even the control over the electoral system. But now we have some serious proposals, and there are obviously critiques from both political parties, but there is an opportunity here. I mean, thinking about the multiple pressure points, thinking about supporting calls to, you know, there are proposals that would say Facebook and Google are common carriers. I mean, in some ways, it sounds like an antiquated argument, but it has new resonance now. You're not going to be allowed to sell the advertising. The advertising is going to be something separate. The advertising is going to be regulated. There's an opportunity now to push some of that stuff, and also just want to say to regulate the political advertising. You know, 2 weeks ago, 2 Democrats, including Anna Issue of California, introduced bills that would regulate political micro-targeting. There should be a bill here in California that does the same thing. If you threaten Mark Zuckerberg's finances, that will put the most pressure on the board and Zuckerberg.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The advertisers, unfortunately, need Facebook too much. Facebook boycotts in the short term, I don't think are going to work, but threatening regulation may.
So I think that the word that that comes to mind is something you just said, Jeff, which is multiple. I think we need, you know, this is a very layered problem. And so we need a multi-pronged solution. And I think it's not one or the other here. So I wouldn't say that it's just content moderation or it's just the advertising system. We really need to take like a whole, we need to look at the whole thing. And I think we need to come up with different solutions and maybe apply them all at once, because that's the only way we're going to fix it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I would add to that also, just exactly what Carmen was saying, but there are certain short-term threats that we need to deal with right now. We see the fabric of American society being torn apart by the toxic social media system. And our research shows just how much toxicity is directly due to stuff that's spreading on Facebook. And the problem is that this exact model, Facebook is built based on this kind of US specific political culture that's been growing, but it's being exported globally. So we're seeing the same problems now because of how Facebook's designed, popping up in other countries to a large extent. And this is urgent because our democracies around the world are under threat. And this requires fast action, moderation, fighting disinformation. But definitely in the long term, we need to rethink the whole social media tech industry and how it functions. They do have too much power. You know, Mark Zuckerberg currently may be bad, Imagine if you had someone like Rupert Murdoch running Facebook and had all this power, and how much more danger we would be in. So these companies do need to be regulated. Their power needs to be decreased. All of that needs to happen. But in the short term, we can't lose this battle to fix what's happening right now, because if we lose this battle, we will definitely lose the long-term battle of fixing the whole infrastructure.
Yes, we have people in the chat bringing up sort of these sort of short-term acute things. For example, people being told that Antifa is coming into their town to loot and riot and take things apart. You know, every week it's a different sort of catastrophic level of disinformation. We were just talking about coronavirus disinformation, 2 weeks ago? So I guess what people are feeling is a kind of sort of impatience in terms of, you know, taking action sort of right now, because if it's not one thing, it's another. We're sort of, you know, we're sort of facing a sort of sensationalist whipping of the public shreds and public conflicts for profit. It's for nothing but profit. And I think the question is sort of, you know, are there actions that we can kind of take to kind of slow this down? Because, for example, apparently all over the country in small towns, people are waiting for incoming Antifa contingents to raid their towns. This is absurd. This is not happening. Yet it's all over Facebook. Is there a way, Fadi, that your sort of, you know, fact correcting effort can keep up with this in real time? Is there something that we could put into place that would knock this stuff out before it crosses the country in lightning speed?
Yeah, I would say two things. The first is, I want to start with the detox the algorithm idea. There are certain pages that do coordinated inauthentic activity to amplify this type of disinformation. We'll actually release a report tomorrow that shows some of the pages doing this. What Facebook could do today is that for pages that are found to be amplifying this very clear misinformation, let's say a page has posted 3 misinformation posts, like the Antifa story. Another story we found is that the Black Lives Matter movement is planning massacres in white suburbs. Very, very dangerous stuff. And what people could do is that if a page is found to share, let's say, 3 of these pieces within a week, Facebook can decide to downrank the reach of those pages so that it just can't go viral. It's stuck. That would prevent this stuff from, as you said, traveling across the US at lightning speed. And then for the people who see it, of course, you know, Facebook may not be able to downrank these pages fast enough, but for the people who see it, Facebook can also just send them a notification saying, hey, you saw this post about this, like, Antifa placing bricks in downtown, I don't know, Oregon or something, in downtown like New York City or something like that. And this post was proven to be false, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that would build resilience within the American public. And Facebook could do that. They don't need to do that with every post. If they just do that to posts that have reached more than 5,000 people, let's say, because they can find how many people each post reached, that would be enough. That would kill this type of toxicity or significantly limit it. And one thing I just want to say in terms of what we can do, right now inside Facebook, there's a rebellion. I'm sure many of you heard about it, but Facebook employees who are people like us, who live around us, who a lot of them want to fight this, share the values, they're demanding that the company act. And I think we need to make sure that we reach these employees, tell them that they're supported. And Facebook needs these people because their skill set is very rare. They need as many of them as possible. And if we can continue to have them stand up, speak up, and even go on strike sometimes until the company fixes its policies, that would be an effective, quick step that we could take.
Okay, thank you. So switching gears a bit into sort of some of the larger questions that we're facing, someone asked a question basically, you know, how do we deal with the irony that still even after everything that we've learned over the past couple of years, so much of our progressive organizing is basically still done on Facebook, and that we are using the tool that we are screaming about, which I'm feeling today, having just done some activism about Zoom and how they need to encrypt things, and yet here we are on Zoom. But anyway, so is there a, so do the panelists have sort of any reaction to the fact that progressive movements and social justice causes, and also journalism and news, have become so dependent on such an incredibly flawed instrument? And that sort of leaves the question of, you know, can we walk away, or has Facebook become sort of too big to fail for all of us?
And look, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna, there's an article recently in Medium, and I will find it and put it into the chat, about just this question, about whether progressive organizations should stop using Facebook. There's certainly conversations about creating alternatives. There are other conversations about how we can wean ourselves off of Facebook and find new ways to reach our activists and our supporters. I think, so I kind of feel like we need to do all of that. You know, I think that unfortunately, some of our organizations have to keep using Facebook for the moment while we build other tools and while someone creates an alternative to Facebook. And at the same time, we need to campaign to change Facebook. It reminds me of, you know, the Delete Facebook movement reminds me of when we were doing corporate campaigns to pressure the Gap and Nike to change their labor policies, which Global Exchange was a leader on. So, you know, you could stop wearing Gap clothes, you could stop buying Nike sneakers, but you still needed to also put pressure on the company to change its labor policies. So I feel like for individuals that feel like it was enough to delete Facebook, you need to also pressure Facebook. And that doesn't have to be on Facebook. I think you're hearing about a lot of other ways to do that. So I think deleting is not enough. And just to add one more thing, you know, we've also seen folks that have tried to either do blackouts where people leave Facebook for, you know, a day or 2 days, or put up, we participated in one where people put black photos as alternatives to their profile photos. But when you're talking about more than 2 billion people, it is very hard to be noticed. So those are a few thoughts.
Can I add something? I mean, progressives needed to have done this 30 years ago, but the increasing availability of 5G and how the spectrum is changing and what that will mean, it's all going to be commercialized. There need to be progressive public interest and broad, generally democratic strategies to make sure that that new powerful spectrum is reserved for the uses that would allow for the kind of diversely owned and multiple business models that would allow our voices, and others potentially, but our voices to be sustained through this new digital world. It's a mistake to rely on Facebook and on YouTube, which are basically highly commercialized, and where the people with the most money will always be able to dominate. So there's an opportunity here, but somebody has to organize and seize on it, because 5G is being given out now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I just want to add something too. I mean, the technology is a tool, right? And so, and at Free Press, we believe it can be used to liberate us, or it can be used to oppress us. And so it's about how we use this tool. And just because, for example, with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg thinks that the tool is only going to be used for good and connecting the world is a good thing, that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen, right? So there is a lot of good that can happen on Facebook. We also have to deal with the bad. And, you know, this is also something, you know, at Free Press, we also do media advocacy and promote media diversity, because the media is part of this problem as well. And it creates this ecosystem with Facebook and with social media platforms. And so it is, you know, there's a lot there. And I think there's a lot of good, and there's so many issues that we need to deal with. And I don't think they're, you know, they're mutually exclusive.
It may not be, but Facebook and Google, and Facebook certainly, look, it's focused on mass global consumption of products and services. That's all it's about. And the question, you really cannot have a democratic platform, I think, exist on a system whose priorities and investment is strictly the maximization of profit to sell products and shape people's identity to want to buy products, whether it's voting for Trump or eating a McDonald's burger.
Okay, I have one more question in the chat. I actually have several more than one, but this sort of links into what we were just talking about, and I like the questions, so we're going to take one more question before we head out here. And this is from Anonymous, and it says, as a tech worker, how can I work to dismantle the tech bro capitalist fetish of the technology sector as a world-changing deity that is without flaw? It is difficult to engage in conversation with an industry that has yet to address its own ego. And I think that very much relates to the shareholders' efforts and the meetings with kind of Zuckerberg that we talked about. But yeah, how do we engage an industry that, to say the least, just isn't getting it? Anyone?
I mean, look, all I can say, I mean, there are a lot of good tactics. Regulate them. I mean, try to regulate them in as many places, in as many ways as possible. Yes, expose them, embarrass them, organize them, but regulate them. And that does include, frankly, exposing how they work with Coca-Cola and McDonald's and the Trump campaign in terms of the data uses and all that. Multiple efforts, but they're only going to pay attention to you if they feel politically threatened. And it doesn't have to be in the United States. I mean, they were threatened in the EU, and more needs to happen in the EU because of their privacy laws there. So we need to threaten them as many places as possible.
So we have regulate them, fact check them, jump up and down in front of their house. We have a lot of tactics going on, and get to their advertisers. Anything else?
I think also
before you put in as a closing comment?
Well, for this person who's a tech worker, I am not a tech worker, and you probably understand the culture of tech workers better than I do. And so you are probably better at figuring out how to influence those people. But what I can say is that there are moments when things happen and when people who are not awake start waking up. And with Facebook, we see those on a pretty regular basis. So the fact that the Facebook workers were so enraged by Donald Trump's tweet promoting violence in response to protests against racism, was one of those moments. And so I think we need to do whatever we can when those moments occur to amplify them and to support the people who are putting them out. And, for those of us, and there are many of us who know people who work at Facebook, to speak out, because they do have a lot of power.
And
okay. Yes, go ahead, Fadi.
If I can add 2 quick points as well. The first is that definitely speak out. And also there are different ways of speaking out. We saw the recent report in the Wall Street Journal that showed that Facebook knew its platform was radicalizing people in 2018 and didn't act. Be a whistleblower. That's another way. I know the majority of people in the tech sector are well-meaning people. They see a lot of problems, and it can be scary sometimes to speak out. It can be a risk to your job, a risk to your career. But at certain moments, being a whistleblower is the best thing you can do, not just for your community and society, but also for the company. You can save the actual values that some of these companies have been built on and espousing by ensuring that certain things they're doing against those values are out in the open. And there are different ways to support you in doing that. And the second point I want to make is, let's remember that this is about building a movement. Over 2,500 doctors have come together, including medical organizations that represent millions of nurses and doctors around the world, to call on the platforms to act, to prevent them from literally killing us by allowing this misinformation to spread. Victims of the Rohingya genocide have come together to pressure these platforms. Mothers, parents have come together to say that the way these platforms function, they are hurting their children. And let's remember that as we move forward, we build a movement. And I want to tell the tech worker who asked that question, you're not alone. There's a movement around you. And I've spoken to dozens and dozens of people that work in these companies that share your same values and same fears. So let's just continue building this movement, because I'm sure through that, we can shift those companies. We can either take them down or ensure that they democratize and function for the benefit of humanity.
Okay, that is a great note to close on. So this is the first of a series of webinars that we hope to hold in order to continue sort of organizing against Facebook. If you would like to be on the list to get information about upcoming webinars, take a look at the chat box. There's a sign-up sheet there. We hope to have Facebook workers, Facebook advertisers, representative of the California Attorney General, a number of other sectors and constituencies join us in these upcoming calls. And we also hope to continue in one way or the other doing some actual on the street, off the computer activism around Facebook right here in their backyard. So thanks everyone. And we look forward to seeing all of you soon on the next go round. Keep protesting, and everybody stay safe in these tumultuous and powerful and emotionally draining times that we are going through. Thank you, everyone. And goodbye.
Thank you.